Damascus, April 2001. In a walled villa near Mount Qasiyun, a Syrian general lay face down on a massage table, breathing slowly as warm oil loosened his shoulders. He believed the man behind him was there to heal pain caused by war and stress. What he did not know was that the oil warmer on the floor contained a micro camera, Unit 8200 Model K7, quietly recording the room's exits, alarms, and blind spots. For 7 years, dozens of Syria's most powerful men invited the same therapist into their homes, trusting him completely. Every session was an intelligence operation. It would end in death, extraction, and an operation known as Silent Hands. Karim Hanna was born in February 1969 in Homs to a Christian family that understood survival. In Syria during the 1970s and 1980s, minorities survived by being useful, quiet, and untrusted by those in power. The formative event came in 1987 when Hanna was 18. His uncle, a low-level clerk in the Interior Ministry, vanished overnight after asking questions about missing files. The family received no explanation. Nobody. The lesson was immediate. Silence preserves life. By age 22, Hanna had learned to listen without appearing to hear, to remember without appearing to retain, and to move through powerful spaces without leaving impressions. Hanna trained as a licensed physiotherapist in Damascus between 1991 and 1995, specializing in deep tissue rehabilitation and combat injury treatment. Syria's involvement in Lebanon and internal security operations created steady demand for specialists who could treat nerve damage, chronic pain, and stress-related conditions among senior military officers. Hanna's capability went beyond technical skill. He possessed what intelligence professionals call invisible intimacy, the ability to be physically close to someone while making them feel completely unobserved. Associates described him as present but forgettable, attentive but never intrusive. This combination made him professionally valuable and operationally invisible. The connection to intelligence work began organically in 1999. A Republican Guard colonel suffering from severe lower back pain, the result of a vehicle accident during operations in southern Lebanon, sought treatment outside military medical channels. Standard military doctors kept records. They asked questions. They reported treatments to supervisory chains. The colonel needed discretion. He was referred to Hanna through a family connection. Over 6 weeks of treatment, Hanna reduced the colonel's pain significantly. More importantly, he never asked about the injury's origin. He never mentioned the treatment to anyone. He never kept written records beyond basic appointment times. When the colonel returned to active duty, he recommended Hanna to a general in the Republican Guard suffering from nerve damage and chronic insomnia. The general's case was more complex. The nerve damage resulted from a training accident in 1997 involving electrical equipment. Standard treatments had failed. Sleep medications created dependency. Hanna approached the problem differently. He didn't just treat muscles. He adjusted treatment times to the general's sleep patterns. He arrived at odd hours, sometimes at 2200 hours, sometimes at 0500 hours, whenever the general experienced acute episodes. He listened to complaints about stress, about subordinates, about the weight of command. He remembered names the general mentioned. He never asked direct questions. Within 4 months, the general's sleep improved. The nerve pain reduced. More significantly, the general began to relax during sessions in ways he didn't with family or staff. This psychological shift, the feeling of being cared for without being assessed, created a form of trust that bypassed normal security consciousness. By 2001, Hanna had developed a client base of 11 senior officers and 3 government officials. His reputation spread through informal channels as someone who could reduce pain without leaving documentation, Who could be trusted with vulnerability? And who understood that powerful men needed spaces where they could stop performing strength? Syrian counterintelligence monitored drivers, construction workers, domestic staff, and security contractors with varying degrees of intensity. Medical professionals treating regime officials received background checks, but once cleared, they operated largely unmonitored. The assumption was that a physiotherapist treating muscle pain posed minimal intelligence risk. This assumption was understandable but flawed. Hannah had access to homes that Syrian counterintelligence considered impenetrable. He saw floor plans. He observed security routines. He heard complaints about upcoming operations, about family travel, about which days were difficult and which were quiet. He noticed when guards changed shifts, where alarm panels were located, which rooms generals used for sensitive conversations. None of this information was classified. None of it was asked for. All of it was operationally valuable to an intelligence service seeking human access to Syria's command structure. Intelligence services had tracked Syria's senior military leadership for decades. But by the early 2000s, Mossad faced a specific and worsening problem. Syrian generals were increasingly unreachable through traditional signals intelligence. After Israeli operations in the 1990s demonstrated vulnerability to electronic intercepts, Syria's military leadership hardened communications infrastructure. Landlines used older, more secure systems. Mobile phone use was restricted among senior officers. Sensitive meetings moved from offices to private villas, protected by layered physical security. The doctrine guiding Mossad's response was called the proximity strategy. The logic was straightforward. When technological penetration fails, embed human presence that belongs in the target environment. Intelligence value comes not from stealing secrets, but from being present when secrets are lived. The strategy required identifying individuals who could maintain long-term access to protected spaces without triggering security reviews. Traditional human assets had failed in this environment. Drivers rotated every 18 to 24 months under Syrian counterintelligence protocols. Domestic staff underwent background checks and faced restrictions on movement. Construction crews were monitored during any work inside security zones. What remained largely untouched was personal care. Medical and therapeutic professionals were trusted because their work required physical proximity and repeated access. They were rarely searched. They were invited back. They saw private spaces that even family members sometimes avoided. The obstacles to this approach were severe. Syrian security culture assumed absolute loyalty from anyone granted access to senior officials. Internal surveillance systems monitored patterns. Foreign intelligence services understood that one compromised session, one suspicious question, one noticed camera, one misplaced item, would collapse not just the individual operation, but potentially expose wider networks. The risk calculation was brutal. High-value access against total loss scenarios. The trigger to move from theory to execution came in March 2001, when Mossad's Damascus network identified Hannah as a rare convergence of strategic factors. He had demonstrated access to 11 officers and 3 officials. He maintained that access through trust rather than institutional requirement, making him sustainable long-term. He was a religious minority in Syria, creating potential ideological or practical motivation for cooperation. He had family outside Syria, creating leverage. His profession provided natural cover that required no fabrication. Within 48 hours, Mossad's planning division assessed Hannah as viable for approach. The assessment noted specific risks. He had no intelligence training, no operational experience, and no indication of pre-existing sympathy toward Israel. The assessment also noted advantages. His professional reputation was genuine, his access was self-sustaining, and his psychological profile suggested someone who had learned to compartmentalize emotional responses, a skill essential for sustained deception. By late April 2001, authorization came through to initiate recruitment. The method selected was indirect approach through a Lebanese intermediary with medical supply connections. The timeline allowed for 12 months of assessment before any operational tasking. If Hannah demonstrated capability and control during that period, the operation would proceed. If he showed signs of instability, psychological fracture, or security consciousness that might trigger confession, extraction would occur before any intelligence collection began. But first, one critical element needed resolution. Hannah had to agree. And his agreement had to come from understanding what he was becoming. Not a spy who steals documents, but someone who would transform care itself into collection, intimacy into intelligence, and trust into tactical advantage. The conversation would occur in Beirut in June 2001, in a hotel room overlooking the Mediterranean, between a man who healed bodies and people who studied how to break them. The operation was compartmentalized under the internal designation Silent Hands, assigned code reference SH-primary in Mossad's archive system. Hannah received the asset designation SH17, indicating he was the 17th individual approached for this specific operational framework, though only the third to proceed past initial recruitment. The compartmentalization was absolute. Hannah would never know the fate of the intelligence he collected. He would never receive operational feedback. He would know collection requirements and nothing more. Recruitment occurred in Beirut between June 3rd and June 7th, 2001. The approach was handled by a cutout, a Lebanese businessman named Fuad Masri, who supplied medical equipment to clinics across Syria and Lebanon. Masri had worked with Mossad since 1996, though he believed his contact was with a private intelligence firm serving pharmaceutical companies tracking Middle Eastern markets. He didn't know the actual sponsor. He didn't need to. Masri invited Hannah to Beirut for a professional equipment demonstration, expenses paid, at the Summerland Hotel. On June 4th, after a legitimate product presentation, Masri introduced Hannah to a man who identified himself as David Corman, representing a European medical research foundation interested in stress response patterns among conflict zone professionals. The foundation, Corman explained, was willing to pay $15,000 monthly for participation in a long-term study documenting treatment patterns, client stress indicators, and professional observations. The pitch was layered. It started with legitimate academic language, shifted gradually toward intelligence terminology, and concluded with explicit operational requirements. Hannah was told the research had strategic health applications that required environmental documentation and behavioral pattern analysis of individuals in high-stress command positions. The language obscured nothing for anyone trained to hear it. Hannah understood by the second meeting. His questions were direct. Who would see the information? What happened if he was caught? What protection existed for his family? Corman's answers were equally direct. The information would be analyzed by organizations Hannah would never meet. If caught, no rescue would occur. But financial arrangements for his family were irrevocable and pre-positioned. Protection meant extraction before exposure, not intervention after. Hannah asked for 72 hours to consider. He received it. On June 7th, he accepted. The agreement included $15,000 monthly transferred to a numbered account in Cyprus, guaranteed family extraction if requested with 48 hours notice, and confirmed Canadian residency processing beginning immediately, for use after operation termination. The timeline for termination was undefined, but estimated at 5 to 7 years. Payment for completed service was set at $1.2 million, transferred upon confirmed extraction. Hannah's cover required no fabrication. His credentials were authentic. His clientele was real. His professional reputation was his own. Mossad's contribution was infrastructure, equipment designed to blend into medical practice while serving intelligence collection. The primary tool was a modified oil warmer, model designation K7, developed by Unit 8200's Technical Division. The device functioned as advertised, maintaining massage oil at consistent temperature. It also contained a pinhole camera with 180 degrees field of view, activated by pressure plate when the base was set down. The camera recorded to internal flash memory, capturing approximately 14 hours of video at reduced frame rate before requiring data transfer. The device appeared identical to standard commercial warmers. Disassembly required specific tools. Even if examined, the camera components were sufficiently miniaturized that cursory inspection revealed nothing. Secondary equipment included passive RF listeners disguised as electrical adapters, designed to detect and log radio frequencies used by security systems without transmitting signals that might trigger counter-surveillance sweeps. The adapters required wall outlet placement, limiting utility to rooms where Hannah legitimately needed power for equipment. Memory cards were standard commercial format, swapped during routine resupply visits coordinated through Masri's medical supply business. Communications architecture avoided all electronic transmission from Syrian territory. Dead drops occurred every 21 days, timed to coincide with Hannah's routine supply purchases from Masri's Damascus warehouse. The drop protocol was simple. Hannah placed exposed memory cards inside sealed equipment packaging marked with specific lot numbers, returned the packaging to the warehouse as defective inventory, and received replacement supplies containing fresh cards plus written instructions on waterproof paper disguised as equipment certification documents. The team supporting SH17 was deliberately minimal. One handler, operating from Beirut, managed recruitment, requirements, and psychological assessment. One logistics officer, working through Masri's supply chain, handled equipment delivery and dead drop coordination. A separate analysis cell in Tel Aviv received intelligence product, but maintained no contact with operational elements. Hannah never met the handler after the initial recruitment. He never knew outcomes. He received only collection requirements, which homes to prioritize, which rooms mattered, which conversations to remember. The first operational session occurred July 19, 2001, in the Damascus home of Major General Qasim Fayyad, commander of the Republican Guard's 3rd Division. Fayyad suffered from chronic shoulder pain resulting from a helicopter incident in 1998. Hannah had treated him since early 2000. The relationship was established. The trust was real. Hannah arrived at 1900 hours carrying his standard equipment bag and the modified oil warmer. Fayyad's security detail recognized him. They waved him through the gate without search. Inside the villa, Fayyad's wife offered tea. Hannah declined politely, explaining the general was expecting him. She showed him to the second-floor study where Fayyad waited. The session lasted 90 minutes. Hannah set the oil warmer on the floor near the massage table, activating the camera through the pressure plate. While treating Fayyad's shoulders, he listened to complaints about an upcoming inspection, about subordinates who didn't understand logistics requirements, about the exhaustion of maintaining readiness during summer heat. Hannah responded with sympathy, with technical observations about how stress manifests in muscle tension, with suggestions about sleep positioning. The camera recorded the room's layout, the location of the alarm panel near the door, the sight lines from windows, the heavy curtains that would block external observation. The session ended at 20:30 hours. Hannah packed his equipment, including the oil warmer now containing 14 minutes of surveillance footage. He departed through the front gate. The guards thanked him for helping the general. One mentioned his own back pain. Hannah offered to schedule a consultation. Over the next 2 years, access deepened organically. Hannah's sessions expanded to 17 clients by the end of 2001, 23 by mid-2002, and stabilized at 31 by early 2003. The pattern was consistent: 90-minute sessions, 2 to 3 times weekly per client, scheduled around operational demands that Hannah learned indirectly. The intelligence value came from accumulation rather than dramatic revelation. A general mentioned he'd be traveling for 4 or 5 days starting next Tuesday. Another complained about long meetings that made his schedule unpredictable until after the weekend. A third expressed frustration about family travel being delayed because things are tense right now. None of this was classified information. All of it had operational value when correlated with signals intelligence and pattern analysis. Stress indicators suggested operational cycles. Travel patterns indicated command movements. Family schedule changes signaled security status elevations. During a session on March 12, 2003, with Brigadier General Walid Hashim, head of Syrian Military Intelligence's Operations Branch, Hannah experienced what handlers later called legend drift, the psychological blurring when false identity feels more real than the original. Hashim had been complaining about insomnia for 20 minutes, while Hannah worked on tension in his neck and shoulders. The general mentioned his daughter's upcoming wedding, expressing worry that work demands might force him to miss planning meetings his wife deemed essential. Hannah found himself genuinely sympathizing, offering advice about delegation and family priorities. For approximately 7 minutes, he forgot he was collecting intelligence. He was simply a therapist helping someone manage stress. The realization came when Hashim mentioned needing to finalize security protocols before Thursday's session, language that triggered Hannah's trained recognition of operational indicators. Hannah's focus snapped back. He noted the timeline, the mention of protocols, the implied upcoming event. He resumed collection mode. But the 7-minute gap revealed something his handlers would later assess as both risk and asset. Hannah's ability to genuinely care about the people he was exploiting made his deception more sustainable, not less. Authenticity was cover. In the post-operation debrief years later, analysts would note that Hannah's psychological integration of his dual role, healer and asset, prevented the emotional fracturing that typically compromises long-term penetration agents. But at the time, during that March 2003 session, Hannah simply finished the treatment, packed his equipment, and left. The mission continued. The near failure came April 9th, 2003. During a session at the home of General Ibrahim Suleiman, Deputy Commander of Air Force Intelligence, Suleiman's 23-year-old son entered the room where Hannah had been setting up equipment. The son, recently graduated from university in Moscow and newly employed in the telecommunications ministry, noticed an electrical adapter plugged into a bathroom outlet near where Hannah typically stored his equipment bag. The adapter was a passive RF listener, placed during the previous session to monitor security system frequencies. The son asked what the device was. Hannah explained it was a power adapter for equipment charging. The son, trained in electrical engineering, examined it more closely and noted the design seemed unusual for standard medical equipment. He asked if he could photograph it to look up the specifications online. Hannah's training provided no protocol for this scenario. He made a real-time decision based on professional authenticity. He unplugged the adapter, handed it to the son, and said if it seemed suspicious, then he should throw it away. Medical equipment manufacturers, Hannah explained, often included cheap adapters that looked unofficial. He'd had problems with them before. If the son's father's security was at risk, the adapter wasn't worth the concern. The son examined it further, uncertain. Hannah began packing all his equipment, telling the son he understood the caution and respected it. If there was any concern about any equipment he brought into the house, he would stop bringing it. General Suleiman's safety came first. The son, facing the prospect of explaining to his father why the therapist who'd been reducing his chronic pain had just left, hesitated. He handed the adapter back and apologized for the suspicion. Hannah declined to take it. He left it on the counter and departed with the rest of his equipment. For 6 weeks, Hannah suspended all visits to the Suleiman residence. During that period, his handler assessed whether the operation had been compromised. Syrian counterintelligence showed no elevated activity. Suleiman made no changes to his security protocols. The son never mentioned the incident to his father, apparently concluding it was insignificant. In late May, Suleiman called Hannah directly, asking why treatments had stopped. His pain had returned. He needed the sessions resumed. Hannah explained he'd been managing increased client demand and apologized for the gap. Sessions resumed May 27, 2003. No adapter was ever placed in the Suleiman residence again. Trust had been preserved through authenticity. The willingness to walk away had confirmed Hannah was exactly what he appeared to be. Someone who cared about safety over convenience. The execution window opened in 2004 when Mossad confirmed repeatable access patterns to 31 senior officers' homes. Each mapped multiple times through video documentation, RF logging, and Hannah's verbal reports on security routines. The intelligence product shifted from collection to action support. February 14, 2004. Analysis cells in Tel Aviv completed assessment of home security vulnerabilities for 7 priority targets. The assessment identified 3 individuals whose home security architecture contained exploitable gaps when correlated with routine behavioral patterns documented through Hannah's access. The first was Brigadier General Mahmoud Kazal, Chief of Syrian Air Defense's Northern Command, whose villa near the Lebanon border featured external security cameras with a documented 4-minute recording loop and dead zones near the eastern perimeter wall. Hannah's surveillance had documented that Kazal typically took a 90-minute nap between 1400 and 1530 hours on Thursdays, following weekly staff meetings that ended at 1300 hours. The nap occurred in a second-floor bedroom facing west, away from the perimeter wall. Hannah had recorded the room configuration during 6 separate sessions. The window was always closed. Kazal used sleep medication and noise-canceling headphones due to sensitivity to aircraft sounds from a nearby military airfield. On March 4, 2004, Kazal attended his regular Thursday staff meeting. The meeting concluded at 1300 hours as expected. He returned home, ate a light meal, and went upstairs at 1355 hours. At 1407 hours, a 2-person team crossed the eastern perimeter wall during the camera loop gap, entered the villa through a ground floor window previously identified as having a disabled alarm sensor, moved to the second-floor bedroom, and administered a lethal injection of potassium chloride while Kazal slept. Total time inside the house, 6 minutes 40 seconds. Kazal was discovered by household staff at 1600 hours, apparently dead from cardiac arrest. The injection site was subcutaneous in the lower back, a location chosen because Kazal had chronic pain there from old injuries, making medical examiners unlikely to notice the small puncture among existing treatment marks. Syrian investigators attributed the death to natural causes given Kazal's documented heart condition and recent stress. No foul play was suspected. The case closed within 3 weeks. Hannah learned about Kazal's death from other clients who mentioned it during sessions, expressing shock at how sudden it was. He said nothing. He continued treatments. The only change he noticed was increased security consciousness among some generals who began asking more questions about his background, though no one restricted his access. The second action occurred July 22, 2004. Targeting Colonel Rashid Harmush, Director of Syrian Military Intelligence's Technical Surveillance Division. Harmush was responsible for Syria's counter-surveillance programs, making him both valuable to eliminate and dangerous to approach. Hannah had documented that Harmush's home in Damascus's Abu Rumaneh district featured a safe room in the basement, accessed through a concealed door in the ground floor library. The safe room was designed as protection during security incidents. What Harmush didn't know was that Hannah's surveillance had recorded the door's location. The mechanical lock sequence visible when Harmush demonstrated the room to family members during a session when Hannah was treating him in an adjacent room. And the fact that the room's ventilation system connected to the main house, HVAC, creating a potential gas delivery pathway. On July 22nd at 0200 hours, while Harmush slept, a team accessed the house's HVAC system through an external maintenance panel and introduced carbon monoxide into the safe room's ventilation line. And the gas delivery took 12 minutes. At 0215 hours, a triggered alarm, activated by the team, caused Harmush to wake and move to the safe room per his emergency protocol. He sealed himself inside. Within 18 minutes, carbon monoxide concentration in the sealed room reached fatal levels. Harmush lost consciousness at 0233 hours and died at 0251 hours. The team withdrew. At 0600 hours, household staff found Harmush dead in the safe room. Syrian investigators concluded that a malfunction in the safe room's independent air system had caused carbon monoxide buildup. The room was designed for short-term security, not extended occupation. The death was ruled accidental. The safe room's design was subsequently reviewed, but no suspicion of external action emerged. When Hannah learned about Harmush's death 3 days later, he felt nothing immediate. The disconnection between the information he provided and the actions taken prevented direct emotional connection. Later, during a session with another client who mentioned Harmush had young children, Hannah experienced delayed recognition of what he'd enabled. The feeling lasted approximately 40 minutes before he compartmentalized it. His training hadn't prepared him for this. His psychological adaptation created its own protocol. Acknowledge the reality, accept the role, continue the work. The third action, targeting Major General Fawzi Abbas, occurred without Hannah's advanced knowledge. Abbas commanded the Republican Guard's Special Forces Division and maintained extreme security consciousness. His home in the Medzeh district featured rotating guard schedules, random security patrols, and motion sensors that Hannah had documented, but which made conventional intrusion impossible. The intelligence Hannah provided on Abbas wasn't about penetrating his home. It was about his routines outside it. Hannah had documented that Abbas attended Friday prayers at the Al-Noor Mosque in Medzeh with concerning regularity. Same time, same route. Minimal security variation. Abbas believed religious attendance demonstrated piety that enhanced his standing. It also created a predictable pattern. On November 19, 2004, at 12:41 hours, as Abbas's vehicle stopped at an intersection 400 meters from the mosque, a shaped charge detonated beneath the vehicle's passenger compartment. Abbas died instantly. His driver survived with severe injuries. Syrian investigators determined the explosive was placed during the night, timer activated, but found no evidence linking it to specific actors. The method suggested professional operation. The target suggested strategic intelligence, but no attribution was made publicly. Hanna continued his practice throughout 2005, 2006, and into 2007 without direct knowledge that his intelligence had supported these 3 deaths. He knew his intelligence was used for operational purposes. That was the nature of the agreement. But the specific applications remained compartmentalized. His psychological state during this period, assessed through coded communications in his dead drop exchanges, showed what his handler described as stable dissociation, functional performance without emotional integration of consequences. He treated clients. He collected intelligence. He maintained separation between the 2 roles. During a session, August 6, 2006, with General Youssef Mansour, head of Syrian chemical weapons development, Hanna experienced a moment of complete clarity about what he'd become. Mansour was discussing family concerns, his wife's health, his son's education abroad, his own fatigue. The conversation was human, mundane, ordinary. Hanna was using a fresh memory card in the oil warmer, recording every word. He realized in that moment that Mansour genuinely trusted him, perhaps more than Mansour trusted anyone in his professional life. The trust was real. The exploitation of that trust was also real. And both could be true simultaneously. Hanna completed the session, packed his equipment, and left. He never spoke about this realization to anyone. By 2007, Mossad's assessment concluded that silent hands had achieved maximum operational utility. The intelligence collection had enabled 3 successful eliminations, provided architectural intelligence on dozens of protected facilities, and created a comprehensive database of behavioral patterns, security protocols, and personal vulnerabilities among Syria's senior command structure. The strategic value was undeniable. The risk profile was increasing. Hanna had maintained the operation for 6 years. His age was advancing. His client base was aging. Natural rotation was beginning as older generals retired and younger officers rose. The sustainable window was closing, and the decision to extract came in March 2008. The trigger was not compromise, but completion. Hanna had provided everything the operation could sustainably produce. Extending it further risked diminishing returns against increasing exposure probability. On April 2, 2008, Hanna received coded instructions in his routine dead drop. Prepare for extraction within 90 days. The extraction protocol was designed to look like natural career progression. Hanna began mentioning to clients that he was considering opportunities abroad, that his practice had become physically demanding, that he'd been approached about teaching positions in Europe. He reduced his client's schedule gradually. He expressed interest in a conference in Beirut about advanced therapeutic techniques. None of this triggered concern. Successful professionals explored opportunities. After 6 years of trusted service, no one suspected ulterior motivation. September 11, 2008. At 0900 hours, Hanna departed Damascus for Beirut, ostensibly to attend a 3-day medical conference at the Phoenicia Hotel. He carried minimal luggage, standard for short trips. His apartment in Damascus remained furnished, his practice equipment stored, his schedule showing appointments resuming September 16th. At 13:30 hours on September 11th, he checked into the Phoenicia. At 1700 hours, he departed through a service entrance, met his handler in a prearranged location, and began the extraction sequence. The route took him to Cyprus by private boat, and then to Athens by commercial flight under Canadian documentation that had been prepared 2 years earlier. From Athens, he traveled to Montreal, arriving September 14th. By September 18th, when clients in Damascus began calling about missed appointments, Hanna was in a secure apartment in Montreal's Côte des Neiges district, beginning a supervised transition program designed to help long-term assets reintegrate into normal life. Syrian intelligence never issued an alert. No investigation was opened. Hannah's departure appeared voluntary, explicable by career ambition, perhaps romantic involvement, possibly financial opportunity. All normal reasons someone might leave unexpectedly. His practice closed, his clients found other therapists. His former apartment was rented to a new tenant within 3 months. When in the absence of evidence suggesting intelligence activity, Syrian counterintelligence had no reason to investigate further. The operation that had lasted 7 years ended without discovery. The final financial transfer of $1,260,000 occurred through layered accounts between October and December 2008, arriving in Hannah's account in increments designed to avoid triggering banking scrutiny. He purchased a small house in the Montreal suburb of Dollard-des-Ormeaux in January 2009 under his Canadian identity. He never practiced physiotherapy again. According to sparse documentation available through immigration records, he worked in medical equipment sales for several years before retiring in his mid-40s. He maintained no contact with former clients, former colleagues, or anyone connected to his Damascus life. The separation was absolute. By late September 2008, Syrian military intelligence had noted Hannah's absence, but assigned no significance to it. The pattern suggested voluntary departure rather than forced extraction. No alerts circulated, no investigations opened. Within Syria's security apparatus, the matter closed as an unremarkable departure of a civilian contractor whose services were replaceable. The 3 deaths that Hannah's intelligence had enabled, Kazal, Harmush, and Abbas, remained attributed to natural causes, technical malfunction, and unspecified terrorism, respectively. Syrian investigators found no connecting pattern. The operations had been spaced over 8 months in 2004. The methods were different. The victims' roles overlapped only in seniority, not function. Without evidence of pattern, no investigation linked them. Every lead ended in procedural dead ends or technical explanations that satisfied institutional requirements for closure. The sophistication wasn't visible because it was designed not to be. Israel made no public acknowledgement of any operation involving Syrian targets during this period. Syria issued no statement suggesting awareness of intelligence penetration. The denials were transparent to those in the intelligence community who understood what silence indicated. But transparency wasn't the point. Public acknowledgement would have required Syria to admit the penetration, something regime credibility couldn't afford. The operation remained unacknowledged on both sides. Strategically, silent hands achieved objectives that extended beyond the 3 eliminations. The intelligence gained included architectural details of 31 protected residences, behavioral pattern analysis of Syria's senior command structure, security protocol documentation across multiple agencies, and psychological profiles derived from 7 years of intimate observation. Secondary benefits included validation of the proximity strategy as doctrine, demonstration that long-term human assets could operate in hardened security environments, and creation of an operational template for similar operations in other theaters. The cost was significant. Diplomatically, the operation risked catastrophic consequences if discovered. Syrian intelligence services would have regarded the penetration as justification for retaliatory operations against Israeli interests across the region. Operationally, the operation revealed tradecraft elements that, if detected, would force adaptation across Mossad's human intelligence networks. The modified oil warmer, the passive RF listeners, the dead drop protocols, all would become obsolete the moment Syrian counterintelligence understood the methodology. Human cost was documented but not quantified. For Hannah, the consequences were psychological fracture requiring years of supervised transition. For the 3 eliminated targets, death, For their families, grief without explanation. For dozens of Syrian generals who had trusted Hannah with vulnerability, the retrospective violation of that trust would have been devastating had they known. Mossad's internal assessment, declassified partially in 2018, and it concluded that silent hands represented optimal intelligence return measured against operational risk and resource investment. The assessment noted that benefits outweighed costs across strategic, tactical, and institutional metrics. Whether this calculation proved correct would depend on factors beyond the operation itself. How the intelligence was used, whether the methodology remained concealed, whether the psychological cost to the asset proved sustainable or ultimately destructive. Those questions remained open when the assessment was written and remain open now. The moral question the operation poses is deceptively simple. Was Karim Hannah a traitor who exploited trust and intimacy to enable death, or a survivor who used the only leverage he possessed against a system that had already demonstrated it valued his silence over his safety? One perspective argues he was a willing participant in targeted assassination, that his financial motivation was clear, that he maintained the deception for 7 years, knowing the probable applications of his intelligence. The evidence supporting this view includes his voluntary acceptance of recruitment, his continued operation after the 2003 near compromise when he could have withdrawn, and his acceptance of over $1 million in final payment. The alternative perspective argues he was a minority in a system where minorities survived through compliance, that his family's experience with state disappearance created reasonable motivation for seeking protection and exit. Nova that his intelligence collection targeted individuals wielding state violence, and that his role was information provision, not execution. Evidence for this view includes his lack of advanced knowledge about specific eliminations, his documented psychological conflict during the operation, and his immediate retirement from any related activity after extraction. The answer reveals more about your worldview than about Hannah. If you believe that operating within violent systems creates moral complicity regardless of individual agency, then Hannah's actions represent betrayal of trust for financial gain and strategic alignment with foreign interests. If you believe that individuals have the right to seek survival and exit from systems that threaten their safety and identity, then Hannah's actions represent rational self-preservation using available leverage against institutional power. What's your take on whether intimacy can be ethically weaponized when the targets themselves wield state power? Does the fact that Hannah's targets were senior military officers in a repressive regime change the moral calculation? If someone builds trust while maintaining hidden purpose, does the fact that the trust was genuine make the deception more forgivable or less? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider what intelligence work actually requires from the human beings who conduct it, hit that like button and share it with someone who thinks about power, trust, and the spaces where they meet.